It was supposed to be just another quiet night in downtown Portland. The streets glowed with golden light from passing cars and fancy storefronts, and the air was filled with the rich aroma of expensive meals being prepared inside restaurants most people couldn't even afford to step into. Inside one of those restaurants, the Golden Plate sat Richard Grant, a 52-year-old tech millionaire known for keeping to himself, dressed in a tailored suit, sipping a glass of red wine worth more than some people made in a week. He stared out the window, lost in thought. His table was covered in silverware, spotless plates, and half-eaten delicacies, lobster tail, truffle pasta, and a dessert barely touched. He wasn't hungry anymore. Not really. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. He had just secured a deal that would make his company's value skyrocket. But instead of feeling joy, or pride, Richard felt ... empty. The soft clinking of glasses, and the gentle hum of laughter around him only deepened the silence in his heart. He adjusted his cufflinks absent-mindedly, and picked up his phone, checking stock prices for the fifth time that hour. Everything was up. His life, on paper, looked perfect. But deep down, something didn't feel right. That's when he saw her. A small face pressed up against the restaurant window, her wide eyes staring directly at his table. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her hair was tied back in a messy braid, her dress too thin for the cold night air. She looked more like a shadow than a child, so still, so silent. Richard blinked, unsure if she was real, and then she knocked just once on the glass. The moment shattered the silence. A few diners turned their heads, frowning. A waiter rushed over to shoo her away, but before they could reach her, Richard stood up. He didn't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe something in her eyes reminded him of someone from a long time ago. Maybe he was just tired of pretending not to care. He stepped out into the night, the warmth of the restaurant fading behind him. She was already turning to leave when he called out, "Wait." The girl stopped and turned around slowly. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can I have your leftovers?" Mr. Richard froze. He had expected a sob story, maybe even a scam. But there was no begging, no long explanation. Just those quiet words and eyes too tired for her age. His instinct was to say no, to turn around, to return to his wine and warm seat. But something about her made him pause. Without a word, he walked back to his table, picked up the to-go box the waiter had just packed, and handed it to her. He watched her take it with small, grateful hands. But she didn't sit down to eat. She didn't even look inside. Instead, she carefully tucked the food into a crumpled plastic bag, nodded once in thanks, and ran off down the street. And just like that, she was gone. Richard stood there, unsure what to do. A part of him felt satisfied he had helped, right? A good deed done. But another part of him felt uneasy. Why hadn't she eaten? Why was she alone, so young, out here at night? Curiosity tugged at him like a loose thread. Before he realized it, his feet were moving. He followed her. The girl darted through the crowd with surprising speed, weaving through alleys and past clothes shops. Richard kept his distance, afraid of scaring her off. His shoes clicked against the pavement, echoing through the empty street. She finally turned into a narrow alley. One of those places that the city forgot. When Richard reached the entrance, he hesitated. The alley was dimly lit, filled with the smell of damp cardboard and the low hum of a nearby vent. And there she was, kneeling on the ground next to what looked like a pile of blankets. But as Richard stepped closer, he realized it wasn't just blankets, it was a child. A younger girl, maybe 2 or 3 years old, lying still, her tiny body curled up beneath layers of thin fabric. Her lips were cracked. Her skin was flushed with fever. The older girl, Mia, as he would learn later, was gently opening the food container and whispering to her, "Annie Beth, I brought food. It's lobster, like Grandma used to tell us about." But the little girl didn't move. Richard felt something inside him twist painfully. This wasn't about hunger anymore. This was about survival. Mia looked up at him, her expression a strange mix of hope and fear. She didn't ask for more. She didn't cry. She just kept whispering to her sister, trying to wake her. "I didn't know where else to go," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "She's been sick since yesterday. We slept here. I thought the food might help." Richard knelt down, his suit brushing the dirty pavement. He didn't care. He reached out and gently touched the younger girl's forehead. The heat from her skin was alarming. He stood up, fumbling for his phone. His fingers shook as he dialed 911. The words came out in a rush. "Yes, I need an ambulance. 2 girls, 1 of them is very sick. She's unconscious. Please, hurry. The operator asked questions: location, condition, his name, but Richard could barely focus. His eyes stayed on the two girls. He couldn't stop thinking, what if I hadn't followed her? What if I had just gone back inside and ignored her? Mia sat back, her small hands wrapped tightly around the food container. She looked at Richard with tired eyes and whispered, I didn't think anyone would help. The sound of approaching sirens echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder. Richard felt frozen in place, unable to look away. He had seen success. He had seen luxury, but he had never seen anything like this. Two little girls, barely clinging to each other, surviving off scraps, in a city that never looked their way. And just when he thought his heart couldn't break anymore, Mia pulled out a small, worn-out locket from her pocket. She held it tight, then opened it to show him the picture inside. This is Grandma, she said quietly. She used to tell us about angels. Richard stared at the photo. The woman's face was aged, kind, familiar, too familiar. His hands trembled as he took the locket, gently, staring at the image. A rush of memories flooded in: a younger Richard, lost and scared. Taken in by a woman named Miss Emily, who ran a tiny foster home on the edge of the city. A woman who had believed in him when no one else did. He looked at Mia. Where's your grandmother now? She died last year, Mia said softly. It's just been us since then. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights bounced off the alley walls. Richard's thoughts were spinning. Was it really possible? Was this Miss Emily's family? The woman who had once saved his life, were these her granddaughters? His voice was barely a whisper. I knew her. She saved me when I was your age. Mia didn't say anything. She just stared at him, as if trying to understand how this stranger could be tied to her past. Richard stepped back, staring at the scene around him: one sister unconscious, the other too strong for her years. The locket still open in his hand, the past meeting the present in the most painful, unexpected way. The ambulance doors opened. Paramedics rushed in, and for a moment, the world stood still. Richard had built an empire. But in this quiet, forgotten alley, beside two children who had nothing, he realized he had never truly lived. The paramedics gently lifted Annie Beth onto a stretcher. One of them looked at Richard. You coming with us? He nodded. And as the ambulance doors closed behind him, Richard Grant knew that everything was about to change. But what he didn't know yet, what he hadn't seen, was the dark shadow, watching them from across the alley. A figure who had followed the girls too, but not with kindness, with a reason far more sinister. And the real story was only just beginning. The sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance turned the corner, leaving behind only flickering red and blue light in the narrow alley. The night felt colder now, heavier somehow. Richard sat inside the back of the ambulance, holding Mia, Claire's hand tightly as paramedics worked quickly over her little sister. Annie Beth: tubes, monitors, words he barely understood, they all blurred together. All Richard could hear was the soft, almost silent breathing of the girl lying on the stretcher. Too shallow, too fragile. Too fragile. Mia sat beside him, her small hand tucked inside his, though she hadn't said much since they left the alley. Her eyes stayed locked on her sister. Her lips moved now and then in quiet whispers, maybe prayers, maybe promises. She looked so small, so tired, but her face never wavered. She didn't cry. Not once. At the hospital, they were separated. Doctors rushed Annie into the emergency room, and Richard had to practically beg them to let Mia stay close. Eventually, a nurse led her to a small waiting room, and Richard sat with her, trying to hold himself together. He had no idea what to say. He didn't know how to make it better. All he could do was sit there, watching over a child who'd already seen too much of the world. As the minutes turned to hours, Richard tried to piece things together. Who were these girls really? Where had they been all this time? How had they ended up alone, in that alley, in the shadows of a city so full of wealth? He thought of Miss Emily, her smile, the warmth in her eyes, the way she'd welcomed him into her home all those years ago. He had been 9, scared, angry, alone. But she hadn't cared about any of that. She just saw a child who needed someone. He had stayed in her small home for 3 years, long enough to learn what love looked like, long enough to know how rare it was. And then life moved on. He got adopted. Then came school. Then work. Success. He had sent her a few letters over the years, maybe a gift on her birthday. But eventually, he stopped. He never visited. He had buried that part of his life beneath boardrooms and bonuses. Until tonight. Now, her granddaughters were sitting in a hospital waiting room, one fighting for her life, the other clutching a plastic bag of leftovers like it was treasure. Mia spoke at last, her voice soft and steady. She used to say you were one of the smart ones. She talked about you sometimes. Richard. He turned to her, slowly, surprised. She remembered me. Mia nodded. She said you were like a rocket, that once you took off, nothing would stop you. Richard let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. I stopped visiting her. Mia. I didn't even know she was gone. She forgave you, Mia said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She said some people leave, but it doesn't mean they stop loving. The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to say something back, but before he could, the nurse walked in. Her face was unreadable. She's stable. For now, she said quietly. Severely malnourished. Dehydrated. She's got a high fever, but we're bringing it down. We'll keep her for the next few days. Monitor her closely. It's a good thing you brought her in when you did. Richard nodded, relief flooding through him like a wave. Can we see her? Mia asked quickly. In the morning, the nurse replied. She needs rest. So do you? That night, Richard booked a private room at a nearby hotel. Not for himself, but for Mia. A hot meal, a warm bath, a soft bed, things he hadn't thought twice about for years. Watching her eat was like watching someone remember how to live. She still moved carefully, always checking to see if she was allowed, always saving a little for later. Just in case. She didn't ask where her father was. Richard did, and the answers he found were not easy to swallow. The next day, he paid a visit to the last known address linked to the girls. It was a small, run-down apartment in a part of town he hadn't been to in years. The building manager, an older man with a gruff voice and tired eyes, recognized the name right away. Anthony Collins. Yeah, he used to live here with his kids. Moved out about 6 months ago. Well, more like got evicted. Richard frowned. Why? Couldn't pay rent. Neighbors complained about yelling, arguments, drugs, probably. Cops came a few times. After his wife passed, the man just broke. Richard's stomach turned. The pieces were falling into place. The mother was gone. The father lost to addiction. And 2 little girls had fallen through the cracks. He found an old social worker. Report filed months ago claiming the girls were supposed to be in temporary foster care, but no one followed up. No one noticed when they slipped away. He spent the next few days digging deeper, calling shelters, schools, clinics, and the more he learned, the angrier he became. How could this happen? How could a system meant to protect children be so blind? How many others were out there, unseen? Back at the hospital, Annie Beth was improving slowly. Her fever was down, and she had begun to respond, opening her eyes, murmuring her sister's name. Richard visited every day, brought books, toys, anything to make the hospital room feel less like a cage. Mia stayed close to her sister, always at her side, but she had started talking more, opening up, bit by bit. She told Richard about the nights they spent in bus stations and under bridges, about the man who had tried to grab Annie once, and how she had screamed until someone called the police, about the old woman at the park who gave them sandwiches every Saturday, about the stories her grandmother told at night, stories about stars, angels, and a man named Richard who made it out. That name used to feel like someone else. Now, it felt like a weight Richard couldn't shake off. One evening, as Richard walked back to the hospital parking lot, something strange happened. He felt someone watching him. He turned. A man stood across the street. Tall, thin, hoodie pulled low. Richard couldn't see his face clearly, but something about him felt off, like he was waiting. Like he was following Richard's instincts. Kicked in. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking. But the feeling didn't go away. That night, he told hospital security, just in case. 2 days later, the man showed up again, this time inside the hospital. Security caught him trying to sneak into Annie's room. When they confronted him, he ran. They didn't catch him, but Richard saw the footage. It was Anthony Collins, the girls' father. No one knew how he found them, but something in his face, sunken, desperate, Wilde, told Richard that this wasn't a happy reunion waiting to happen. Richard sat with Mia later that night, unsure how to tell her. Mia, he began slowly, do you know where your dad is? She went quiet for a moment, then nodded. He was sick. After Mum died, he stopped being himself. Do you think he's still sick? Richard asked, gently. I don't know, she whispered. He said he'd come back for us, but he never did. Richard knew then what had to be done. He couldn't turn away. Not now. The girls needed protection, stability, someone who wouldn't leave when things got hard. He spoke to a lawyer the next day. He didn't know how long this road would be: adoption, guardianship, whatever it took. But he knew one thing: he was all in. But somewhere in the city, Anthony Collins was still out there, still watching, still waiting, and whatever he wanted, he wasn't done yet. The days passed, each one adding more weight to Richard's heart. He stayed close to the girls, moving between the hospital and legal offices, preparing paperwork, answering endless questions from social workers, child psychologists, and lawyers. Mia never left Annie's side. She slept in a chair by her bed, her small hand always resting close enough to hold if Annie stirred. Despite everything, Mia remained strong, silent at times. Yes, but always alert, always watching. She didn't say it, but Richard knew she was afraid. Not just of losing her sister, but of being taken away again, of being forgotten, of being found. And then one rainy afternoon, the past came knocking. Richard was on a call with a lawyer when a nurse rushed into the waiting room. Her face was pale. "There's a man outside demanding to see the girls. He's saying he's their father." Richard felt something cold crawl up his spine. That was Anthony Collins. Security had already called the police. But Anthony wasn't waiting. By the time Richard reached the entrance, Anthony was already inside, soaked from the rain, eyes bloodshot and wild. His hoodie clung to his face, and his hands were shaking not from the cold, but from something deeper, darker. "You took them," Anthony growled. "They're mine. You think you can just steal them like you stole everything else?" Richard didn't move. He held his ground, his voice steady but firm. "They're not property. They're your daughters. And they were starving in an alley while you were disappearing." Anthony took a step forward, his jaw twitching. "You don't know what I've been through. You think money makes you a better man. I don't think anything makes me better," Richard said quietly. "But I know what it means to show up. And I know what it means to leave." There was a silence between them. Cold, long, heavy. Behind them, police officers entered through the main doors. Anthony turned his head just slightly, and, in that split second, the moment cracked. He bolted, but it was too late. The officers caught him just outside the entrance, bringing him to the ground gently but firmly. He shouted, cursed, struggled, until his voice gave out, and all that was left was a broken man in the rain, sobbing quietly into the pavement. But Mia had been watching from the hallway. Her eyes didn't show fear, only sadness. Richard walked over and knelt beside her. "You saw," she nodded. "He's still your dad," Richard said carefully. "But I'll never let anything bad happen to you again." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, in the softest voice, she whispered, "You don't have to promise. I know already." Annie Beth was released from the hospital 2 weeks later. Her cheeks had color again. Her laughter, still small, filled the air like a song that had been forgotten but suddenly remembered. Mia started sleeping through the night. Richard moved them into a new house outside the city. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't meant to be. It was warm, safe, a place to start over. The adoption papers took time, but when they were finally signed, Richard cried for the first time in years, not because it was hard, but because it felt right. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the girls chased each other in the yard, Mia found Richard sitting on the porch steps, staring into the sky. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" he said. "The big life, fancy dinners, the empire." He smiled a little. "Sometimes, but not in the way you think." She sat beside him, folding her knees to her chest. "I miss Grandma every day, I know," he said softly. "Me too." There was a long pause. "Do you think she sees us?" Mia asked. Richard looked at her, his heart full. "I think she's the reason we're here." Mia nodded, then leaned her head against his shoulder. The world was quiet for a moment. What had started with a single question, "Can I have your leftovers?" had become something none of them expected. A moment of kindness led to a life restored. Not just for Mia and Annie Beth, but for Richard. In a world that moved too fast and often looked away, it was a reminder that small choices can change everything. That even the loneliest people can find a family. That sometimes, the most broken hearts hold the deepest strength. And that love, real, selfless, enduring love, is never truly lost. It just waits to be found again.